Hello out there in television land, and welcome to a first in Samsung Productions' It's Your Health. It's the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. We're going back to the future, talking about issues when I came into practice in 1980 and how our boys are taking over those reins of medicine out there in television land. We're going to start each segment with a baby picture, including myself, and then we'll go into topics of interest to you. You're not going to want to miss this show. We'll be right back after this brief commercial message. Remember, you're watching It's Your Health, your leader in healthcare information. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the first segment of It's Your Health. Philip Benyo with Philip Benyo, Dan Benyo, all to bring you the latest and greatest in healthcare information. Remember, it's a back to the future presentation of It's Your Health. And as promised, there's a picture of me as a child with my late great mother, Catherine Brislin Benyo, fiery red hair, and just a beautiful person. We miss her all. And briefly, when I came back to town, of course, my father had Andy's Market on 10th and Locust, a delicatessen, and we started our practice at St. Joseph's Hospital in Hazleton. Started ambulatory care centers. After 10 years, went into private practice. Shortly thereafter, my son Philip joined us. We do internal medicine and geriatrics, and within the past year or two, Daniel joined us as well. So I'll show you now what I look like in the 80s. What do you see that's missing on this picture of me 1980? You don't see me on a cell phone. You don't see me texting. You don't see me ignoring friends and family. We're engaged. So is that one of the things that has occurred since the 1980s till now? Right, boys?
Ooh,
boy.
Okay, what were you saying?
Something's trending here. I gotta look at this. Khloe Kardashian did something.
You know, that's what I'm talking about.
Let me like this. Let me like this. Alrighty.
I'm being ignored. Well, take us to what has happened over the past 20 years.
So cell phones have become more and more prominent, and certainly we start to see them be more prevalent in society. But I think one picture is there are still some chronic conditions that we see back when you practice that kind of trend now into our current decade or generation now. Additionally, there are some diagnoses that may not have been present or noticed when you were practicing.
Exactly. Phip, do you have any comments on how our society has become faithless and faithless? Primarily, I think, because of the use of cell phones. I could be wrong.
Well, I think that, you know, we don't talk to each other anymore. We spend a lot of time looking at our phones. I think it could be a real eye-opener to turn on your phone's ability to track how long you're on it. You know, all phones track that now, and so you'd be surprised how you could spend 4 or 5 hours staring at a phone when you could have been talking to your family, could have been doing stuff with the kids. And when you sit and look at the mirror, part of that starts with us as parents, and part of it starts, you know, with the kids themselves. Kids are, you know, they will look to that easy, quick entertainment, and they certainly won't stop. That happiness always ends sadly, and so I think it's important to look at that and look within and find a better way to interact in general.
No doubt, no doubt. Thanks. And so let's get back to a little bit on the medicine issue. And one of the things that I have brought to my attention when I attended a geriatrics conference, and I know this sounds a little cold and cruel, but look at this. We are, as humans, members of the animal kingdom. And just like anyone in the animal kingdom, we get conceived, we're born, we develop, we reproduce, some of us more than others, or perhaps none. We age, and unfortunately, we die. And part of practicing medicine is to enhance the living process and put off the death and dying process to make life more livable, if you will. Any comments?
Sure, I think what it is to be human is that dying aspect, and unfortunately, for some they are accepting, and for others, maybe not so much. I find that I reflect upon one patient I've had who's in their mid-90s and is complaining or describing a lack of energy and lack of drive, and we're trying to rule out everything that's reversible, but at the same time, that may be part of being a 95-year-old, is you may not have as much gas in the tank. And there's a thought that the generations being born now, we will start to see that 110, 115-year-olds will be a little bit more common than what we see now.
Sure. Any comments there, Phip?
Well, I may be a little bit more pragmatic with that. I think dovetailing off what we initially talked about the use of cell phones, with that is a lack of engagement in the outdoors and in general overall physical health. We expect modern medicine to fix all of our problems, and with medications, with shots, with treatments, to sit and advance our ability to live longer. But are we living longer better? I'm not so sure. I think that it gets back to we need to start being more active and realize that, or we're going to start seeing this advancement in aging. While we might be living longer, we're not going to be living very well longer, and it might start be living less as these generations start to grow up.
That's a good point. It reminds me of a song, in the year 2525, if man's alive, we may not even have arms or legs because we haven't used them. One of the features that I see when I go to nursing homes and I ask people who have hit 85, 90, what's the secret? And it turns down to two things. It's being active, both socially and physically, and guess what? A little bit of alcohol. So if you want to have a little nip of some Dago Red, go right ahead, because that's one of the common themes I've seen is, you don't have to get lit, but just have a little bit of alcohol. But getting on that fact of this silver wave, if you will, and I used to use the term geriatric tsunami until I was corrected kindly by my sibling.
Sure, tsunami is a negative connotation, and getting older isn't necessarily a negative thing.
Tell me about it. So, with this silver tsunami, by the year 2030, 10 years from now, the percentage increase in those over the age of 85 will be greater than those between 75 and 85. I mean, that's just amazing, because when we were first coming out, hitting 80 or 85 was a milestone, if you will. But that being said, what do you see as the challenge in keeping our society healthy? And I think it dovetails with what you said, Phil. We need to get active, stay active. There is no pill for every ill, right?
Certainly not. And so I think living healthy, some of that, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So what you do in your 20s, 30s, and 40s kind of pays dividends in your 80s and 90s if you're fortunate enough to live that long. And so a healthy lifestyle early on kind of provides that good foundation for later on in life.
Keeping that in mind, healthy wife, healthy life, right, Phil?
I have that.
Okay.
I have that.
No comment or
No, I'm the only one agreed to that. So
Okay.
just in this group. But my wife's the only one in the viewing audience for this, so I
There you
kind of have to. Everybody else lives out of town.
Well, we told you that it's the fastest half hour in television history. We're going to be right back after this brief commercial message. Remember, you're watching It's Your Health, your leader in healthcare information. Right, guys?
That's
Correct.
correct.
Great son. Welcome back to the second segment of It's Your Health, and get a load of that. The Fipster in the 1980s. Isn't that something? You've come home.
I'm the only one that has a picture like that. I said it off the air. I'm going to say it on the air. I'm the only one that you brought in a picture like that. Danny's pictures are cherubic, and yet I have to live like this.
The protest is registered. Talk to the FCC, and they'll see if they can take care of those things. But speaking of family, we grew up right across the driveway in our home. Children, 5 packed in that house, and was a blended family. And now that you have grown up and have your own family and children, perhaps you could reflect on growing up here and now raising your children. Add, subtract from that experience.
Well, it's different times. When I was growing up here, we moved up here when I was in 6th grade, but we were here from parts of 4th and 5th. this was a barn, and we had horses, and you had to take care of those horses, and we ran around the barn, we ran around the property. I didn't really have to ask to go out in the woods, just had to be back around whenever it started to get dark. I certainly would never look at my own children now and say, well, go out and play in the woods and we'll be fine. We kind of certainly helicopter, I think, our kids. And I think we're pretty liberal with that compared to others. But, you know, I look at the freedoms that we had as children is very different now for a variety of reasons, both good and bad. I think that's in part some of the activity issues as well that we have. The kids aren't quite as active because we're not letting them kind of free rein whatever they want to do outside. And we certainly are keeping a more watchful eye on them because maybe society has changed a little bit. I don't know.
That is a good point. Even ourselves, when we grew up, we'd be in at the 10 o'clock whistle, and we'd all fend for ourselves. We never had our parents kind of helicoptering or hovering over us. We kind of just grew up, if you will. Dan?
Sure, there's no dinner bell per se now. They used to ring the dinner bell and you'd come in, and I agree with Phip. We would play outside and play in backyard football or baseball or wiffle tennis and have fun and just kind of mosey on back home. And nowadays, not so much. And maybe because we perceive the world as being more dangerous, or maybe we're just aware because of social media about those dangers that exist around us, and so we're a little bit more cautious to allow for that freedom or free range, so to speak.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's get back into medicine and some topics involving geriatrics. Here's a list that looks very interesting. These are the common causes of death in people over the age of 65. As you would expect, heart disease and cancer sort of tops the list. Stroke, obstructive lung disease, accidents. Alzheimer's disease certainly makes the top 10 here. Pneumonia and diabetes. And perhaps not getting into too much detail, maybe you could comment on what we knew about those issues in the 80s and what do we know about them now?
I think what's really curious about that list is diabetes is on the bottom of the list. And one would argue that diabetes can, you know, I've said it many times, diabetics don't die from diabetes, they die from strokes and heart attacks. And, you know, diabetes is the single biggest really threat to our way of life, our medical dollar. People are talking about a lot about, you know, Medicare and Medicare for all. The amount of spending that we spend on the healthcare dollar on diabetics is astronomical. And I was just recently watching a show where another doctor was talking, and he mentioned, you know, if diabetics lost 5 or 10% of their body weight to actually help themselves, the amount of impact positively on our economy as well as our healthcare spending would just be astronomical. We could really fix a lot of the problems we have just based on addressing diabetes better. If you look at that whole list, if we just address one of them and let the rest of them go, there isn't one that wouldn't be more impactful, and that is helping to change the course of diabetes.
Good point, and it's an epidemic because the nation's getting wider, and there's a lot of diabetics out there that don't even know they're diabetics, and there's that issue called pre-diabetes. So that is an excellent point. Dan, your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think nowadays the treatment kind of entails multiple disease states. So we're starting to see diabetic medications that actually treat heart disease and those chronic heart conditions that treat obesity. And so we're starting to see a theme, just as Phip was stating, with weight loss, as well as yourself, that if we were to lose a little bit of weight, several disease states would improve overall. And so I think it's, again, part of the times of it's a fast society. We don't have time for self-improvement, self-reflection, and so we kind of grab whatever's closest to us, and it may not be the healthiest.
It seems like we have time for self-infliction, you know, not self-preservation or improvement.
Well, that's true. Food is love. And one of the diagnoses or issues that are not on that list, which is a real sleeper, no pun intended.
Wow, that was good.
You like that one?
There it is. Wow, wasn't sure how we're going to get there.
Obstructive sleep apnea. Talk about an epidemic. It goes beyond just daytime drowsiness and snoring. So, Fipster, why don't you go over some of the other things that it can present with?
Well, it's sometimes it's very subtle. It can be something as simple as anxiety or depression. It can be sexual loss of function. It can be reflux. It can be just inattention, or I'm tired, or I can't, I have ADD as an adult. I can't pay attention to things. It doesn't have to be something very obvious. In fact, a lot of people who have sleep apnea will tell you, once I fall asleep, I stay asleep. I sleep all night. I sleep great. But they wake up dead tired, and they can fall asleep at the drop of the hat. They'll say that they're having trouble at work. They can't concentrate. There's a lot of different things that are very subtle. But I think today we do a much better job, even compared to when I started practicing, say 16 years ago. We do a much better job of screening for this. Sleep apnea was a diagnosis 16 years ago. We made a couple of those a year. We make a couple of months now, and probably could do more.
So we talk about the symptoms. Now what's even more important, getting back to the list of things that causes death, what is the sequelae? What's the results of untreated sleep apnea?
Sure. So as you stated, the most significant is sudden death, right? It's thought that some people who die in their sleep, pass away in their sleep, is because of obstructive sleep apnea or the consequences of it. It can also lead to cardiac arrhythmias and abnormal heart rate, very commonly seen in people with obstructive sleep apnea. Additionally, heart failure is another big one that we typically see. Sometimes we'll see people who have lower extremity edema, and it's not quite sure why that is. We tend to think it's sleep apnea, and then also people with difficult to control blood pressure. Despite multiple medications, we start fishing for that sleep apnea.
So next time you see your healthcare provider, mention to him, should I be screened for obstructive sleep apnea? If you have a neck collar greater than 17 inches, that's another sort of a marker, if you will. So we'll be right back after this brief commercial message. Remember, you're watching It's Your Health, your leader in healthcare information. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the third and final segment of It's Your Health. Philip Benyo with Philip Benyo, Dan Benyo, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, right? Dan, look at that baby picture of you. I think we were at Disney that day, and it just seems like yesterday, doesn't it?
It does. It's not as good as Phip's picture, but you know,
there was a timelessness to the 80s. You know, we weren't worried about fashion.
With your picture, yours had deep tones. It was maybe taken on a Polaroid. I don't
Professionally done.
It was well done. Yeah, that day was good.
Okay.
It was a good day.
You guys grew up in this area, and now you came back and are helping give medical advice and care to your community. What does that feel like coming back home?
It's nice. I always liked, you know, people love to hate their hometown, but I think that's misguided. You know, there's a lot this area has to offer, and it's been a pleasure to come back and work here. It's, you know, bigger cities and different towns may have a different level of sterility, but you know, certainly it's been fun to grow up with people. It's unique because we get to really take care of multiple generations. You know, I have patients I see grandma, grandpa, the parents, and I'm now seeing the kids, and that's a unique thing because I can tell them more about their family history than some of they can, you know, because I've got to live with it.
Good point. Dan?
Certainly, it's one of the more rewarding experiences, being able to kind of practice in the area you grew up in, and being able to reflect with patients. And some of them bring up information about your parents, my grandparents, that I didn't know of, and they bring up the store and talk about the old hospital and some of the satellites, and it's kind of nice during some of those interactions to kind of reflect upon the area and maybe how it's changed as well.
Right. You know, when I first started out at St. Joe's, I'm working in the emergency room, and someone came in with a laceration on their head, and I'm ready to suture them, and they look up at me, and they say, you know, the last time I saw you, you were in your father's butcher shop. So it went well otherwise after that. You know, we talked earlier about the common causes of death in patients over 65. Let's talk now about the common causes of disability and debility in persons over the age of 65. Get a load of this list. Topping the list, believe it or not, is osteoarthritis. And second, dementia. Macular degeneration or eye issues, I didn't think would be that high. Hearing impairment, of course, we see quite a bit of. Dizziness, imbalance. You're one fall away from a broken hip and a nursing home and a change in life. Congestive heart failure is next. And last on that list is what's called frailty or debility or, just kind of getting old, if you will. Gentlemen, any thoughts about that list there?
I don't see any particular surprises. I think these are the things people find that they impact their ability to kind of do the things they want. They want to be able to be more active and move more, but maybe the arthritis is hindering them. They have a dementing illness. That certainly is not only impactful to them, they may not know it, but very impactful to their families. Macular degeneration, you lose the ability to see, you lose the ability to drive, you're going to fall more. These are all not surprising things. Some of them, again, kind of go back to the theme in the beginning of the show was, if we took better care of ourselves younger, we wouldn't have some of these issues when we're older, or we'd be better able to handle them.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it was a ball player that said, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. Dan?
Certainly, and that list shows basically wear and tear on the body, osteoarthritis, bone on bone, heart failure, wear and tear on the heart as well. And we see kind of macular degeneration, wear and tear on the eyes, and with Alzheimer's as well, an aging brain, so to speak. And so a lot of these conditions, of course, are when we get a little bit older, 65 and older. And as you mentioned earlier, soon to be in 2030, we'll have more 85-year-olds than 75 to 85. So we'll be seeing a lot more of these conditions. And we tend to see now a little bit more intervention, people getting their knees replaced in their mid-70s. And so we start to see a lot more aggressive care in some individuals.
And it's tough to treat some of these diseases. You have someone with arthritis, we're not going to put you on a non-steroidal because of the kidney issues, the bleeding risks. I have had some luck, by the way. This is sort of a off-label with turmeric.
Turmeric.
Well, tomato. What is it? Turmeric? Turmeric, the spice comes in a capsule. And patients who I have put on this medication, but check with your doctor first, have had a downtick in their arthritic symptoms. It really has been impressive. And one of the things that I have reflected on the most is in the 80s, we had extended families taking care of dementia patients or patients who needed caregivers. And now with families spread all over the place, the old story that one mother can raise 5 kids, 5 kids cannot take care of one mother, really rings true. Correct?
Oh, certainly. And that's where we begin to see a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of stress amongst family and in visits is to try to figure out, well, how do we provide care to these individuals? And we sometimes see a lot of use of skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities. Finances become a struggle, and it becomes a little bit more of a challenge when you have other people outside of the family taking care of their individuals.
Yeah. Comment?
Yeah, and the problem is we don't have a great solution to that going forward, and maybe the next generation will have that figured out because I don't think we do. And if the population is aging and those statistics are right, our nursing homes are full now, and they're not building a lot of new ones. That problem's not fixing itself. So that's food for thought, for the future.
No doubt. Listen, thank you for allowing us to come into your home, hopefully entertain you and inform you. Remember to check with your healthcare provider before doing any of the things we talk about on It's Your Health. Gentlemen, it's going to be the seasonal time. Any quick comments about the holidays?
Be safe, don't fall, have a Merry Christmas.
Eat, drink, and be merry.
Hey, everything in moderation. Thank you for joining us. It's Your Health.